You can feel free to put them in the chat. Cindy's just started the recording there. So this webinar will live as a recording. We'll get it, once it's edited, it'll be loaded to our YouTube channel, so you can find that in the future. I just wanted to go ahead and say that I'm Vanessa Johnston. I am an end-of-life doula here in Denver, Colorado, and I am currently serving as the volunteer vice president for the Colorado End-of-Life Collaborative. And Cindy Kaufman is here. She's our president of the collaborative, and she's going to be moderating the chat and doing the recording. So just so you know who we are. So thank you so much for coming for this really, really important topic. And to make sure that you're in the right place, this is what we're going to be discussing tonight. The death of a loved one is a painful and often overwhelming experience at any age, but for children, it can be confusing or scary if they're not given honest information or given opportunities to ask questions. During this presentation, we will identify children's normal reactions to death and discuss the many feelings they may experience. We'll also discuss ways that adults and professionals can help children after a death and identify resources that can be used to support grieving children. So that is the focus of tonight's presentation. So as you can see, it's really important. And here at the Colorado End-of-Life Collaborative, we feel passionately about helping people of all ages deal with the very natural process of death and dying. So Carrie's gonna tell us more about that. So let me introduce Carrie and let you know how she kind of came to this work. So Carrie has worked in the end-of-life and grief field for over 15 years, and she's learned that her passion is supporting grievers of all ages. She graduated from the University of Northern Iowa with a bachelor's in social work and Marian University with a master's in thanatology. Carrie has worked at hospices in Colorado and Iowa as bereavement coordinator and volunteer coordinator, as well as the director of a bereavement program within a funeral home in Des Moines, Iowa. Carrie's other passion is educating professionals and community members on various grief topics, and has had the opportunity to present at conferences both on the local and national level. So we're thrilled that Carrie is sharing her wisdom with us here today. You know, whether this is dealing with children in your own life and knowing how to support them, or as a professional, you know, there are a couple of doulas on the call here. So just whatever tools that we can use to make these conversations easier is really what we're looking forward to hearing. So anything else, Cindy, or should we go ahead and let Carrie present? Thank you so much, Carrie. Appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, Cindy, for inviting me here to your group. And, you know, we'll delve right in. We have really great information that we'll go over tonight. And as Vanessa said, yes, please put in if you have chat, or it's a really small group. I would love this to be a discussion. So if you have something that comes to mind, please, you know, raise your hand, use the chat box, whatever. But please don't feel like you have to wait until the end if it's something really pressing. Because we're a small group, I think that's even better. We'll get some great discussion, hopefully. I do have a PowerPoint that I will go ahead and share with you all. Just give me 1 second. It always takes me a sec to get it all going, but can everybody see that? Are you able to see my PowerPoint? Awesome. I can see you all too. I can only see some of you. So if you do have something you want to share or add, please, again, put it in the chat box. But we'll just go in and I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. So my topic is children and grief, and I think, you know, it's all of our job, whether again it's our own children or children that we know personally, or if it's on the professional level. I do believe that it's all of our jobs to not only help each other through grief and loss, but especially kids. And so that's really what we're going to talk about this evening, is how do we include children in this process? How do we best support them, knowing that kids grieve, children grieve too. It's not just us adults. So as Vanessa said, I currently am working at the HeartLight Center here in Denver, Colorado. Our programming is mostly for adults, but I always say, just because I work with either kids or adults Doesn't mean I don't work with the others. So even though we mainly work with adults right now, we still have a lot of interaction with kids, the children and the adults' lives that we're working with. So again, it's everyone's job. I could talk an hour about what we do at HeartLight Center, but I won't right now. Please, I'll have all that, my contact information, as well as HeartLight's contact information at the end. And if you are looking for grief support and adult grief support, please jump on there and take a look on our website. But what can cause grief? These first couple slides are kind of just general grief, and as we know, grief can hit us at any age, at any stage of our life. It does not matter if it was just a death loss, if it was another change in our life. Any significant change can truly cause grief in our life. As we know, as adults, change is constant, right? It's part of life. There's a lot of transitions. There's a lot of changes and losses that we might go through. But again, thinking about how a child, if they've never had a death loss, or if they've never had a real big change in their life, how are they going to process that? And no matter what age we are, our reactions and how we react to each death and each loss and each change is going to be very individual and is going to vary from time to time and loss to loss. But I believe that grief is truly unique for each and one of us, but every loss is unique as well. And so when I say, when it says on there that everyone grieves at 100%, what I mean by that is everyone grieves that loss and that change at 100%. So if someone's had multiple losses, it means they're grieving each one of those losses at 100% at some point. So just keeping that in mind when we talk about what is grief, what causes grief. Any change, I believe, can cause grief in our life. Grief affects every part of us. It's not just emotional. I think a lot of times we think grief is sadness, and that is what grief is, and it's just that emotion. No, yes, grief can include sadness and you know, that yearning for our loved one after they've died, but it's not just one emotion. When we just even look at the emotional part, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but it is not just sadness that is the feeling we feel after a loss. There's a lot of other feelings. There's a lot of physical reactions and aspects of our grief, meaning a lot of times our brains are just truthfully not 100%. There's the thing that we call the grief brain or grief fog, meaning my brain, I just can't concentrate the way that I normally do. I think there's so much going on when we're processing a change and a loss that it takes us a lot of energy to process that all emotionally. So thinking about how that affects us physically. And we'll talk more in just a little bit about how that can affect children specifically. But I want you to remember, again, whether it's a child or an adult, grief affects every part of our being and really can touch each part of our lives. And again, it varies from each loss, each change, how much and how that is going to affect us. But that's also why I tell people that grief is some of the hardest work that we will ever do. And so when people, I just talked to a gal today and she's like, I'm just tired. I'm just tired. She said, I'm actually sleeping well, but I'm just tired. It feels like I'm in concrete and everything I do is so slow. That's grief. Every action. And again, whether you're a kid, a 5-year-old or 55-year-old, that's something that we all can feel. So even though children's grief looks very different than us adults, there are some common things to keep in mind. Even though everybody's loss and grief and what they feel is going to be very different, there are still those things that we can kind of expect within that grief and what we may experience or what might be considered normal grief. So jumping right into kids and talking specifically about children. So when I say children, this is the other thing that I'll kind of specify. A lot of times I mean from, you know, newborn baby to teenager 18 plus. There are some times where, of course, a 5-year-old is going to grieve very differently than a 10-year-old. A 10-year-old is going to grieve very differently than an 18-year-old. But when I use children, I'll kind of specify if it's younger children or older children or teenagers, but just kind of encompassing children from newborns to, 18 older young adults, really. So it's important to remember, first and foremost, no child is too young to grieve. If a child is old enough to love and to form a bond with someone, they're old enough to grieve. And so even a newborn or a baby that's just a couple months old could grieve the loss of someone. No, that child is not going to understand life and death and everything that entails, but they're still going to understand that somebody who they cared about and they formed a relationship is no longer there. And so, of course, you're not going to be able to have a discussion with a newborn child about what grief is, but you are going to be able to see or could see some reaction to that change in their life. Children, even though a lot of the things that they experience are going to be similar to us adults, there are going to be some differences as well. And that's what we're going to focus on. And again, remembering that each child is truly different than their sibling, than a classmate, than a friend. It's going to be different than how us adults are grieving. And I think the biggest time that I get a question from parents or a caregiver is when that child's grief doesn't look like the other children that they know in their life. And so, little Susie, who's 5 years old, her grief might look very different than her sister, who's 7 years old. And again, we want to think about that child as an individual. What is their personality style? Where are they developmentally? Not even just the age of the child, but developmentally. I know 5-year-olds that honestly act like they're 20 and they have conversations that are so old for them, for their age, but maturity and developmentally, they're older than what their age is. So meeting them where they are at, thinking about where they are at developmentally is going to also help you know, like, what kind of information to give them. How do I explain this? What do we share? What don't we share with them? But a child's grief will truly change and evolve as they keep getting older. Re-grief, so re-grieving something, is very common. That's very common for us adults. And when I say re-grief, I mean our grief may come up in different ways at different times, or it may resurface. Sometimes I call those grief bursts. And so, or grief side swipes are the ones that hit you and you're like, I totally did not expect that. Or I thought I was doing okay and suddenly I had a bad day again. Those grief bursts. On special occasions, we re-grieve. On an anniversary, a birthday. So children are also going to do that. However, their chances of re-grief is going to probably increase because as they get older and as their knowledge of life and death changes, they are going to look at that grief and that loss very, very different. So knowing that as they get older, most likely they're going to re-grieve, or their grief is going to look very different than it did before, because their understanding of grief, their understanding of life, their understanding of death is going to continue to change and evolve. So just keeping that in mind too, that it's not, oh yeah, I was 5 years old when my dad died and I got great support and I processed that and I worked through it. I'll be okay. Even as an adult, I'll be okay. Well, hopefully, yes, that person will be okay. But that does not mean that they will not grieve in different ways throughout their lifetime. So there are three main components that we talk about when we talk about a child's understanding of death. The first one is really that okay, let me actually fast forward just a little or rewind just a little bit. One of the important things that I hope that you can take away from this evening in our conversation is that to truly help a child, we have to first inform them that somebody has died. The language that we use with children is so important. With children, you really want to avoid euphemisms. I will be honest, the whole euphemisms that we have talking about death and loss and grief are kind of silly in our culture. So what I mean by that is, like, we say somebody has passed away. What does that even mean? Think of a child who has never had someone important in their life who has died. And suddenly we say, well, grandma passed away. What does that even mean? I honestly, like, I really should look it up, but it's kind of now a thing where I'm just like, where did that even come from? Right? Where did that start? How did we get that started? But think about the words that we are using when we talk about death and loss and grief. And think about how that could be confusing to a child. And so the number one thing that I tell people is be very open and honest in what we are talking to children about and the words that we are using when we explain them. So even the word loss, like I lost my grandma, you all know what I'm talking about, right? When I say that. However, to a child, especially a younger child, if you're like, we lost grandma, what do you think they're going to say? Let's go find her. Like when we lost our dog, we went up and we put posters and flyers up and we put it on social media to call. We're looking for a lost dog. That's not the same as when someone has died. So again, thinking about how can we honestly explain that and use words that children understand. So thinking of these three concepts when you are thinking about how do I talk to a child or how do I best support them, thinking about the non-functionality when somebody has died. The fact that once something has died, all physical functions cease. So the best way I say this to just kind of just summarize it all is, what does it mean when someone has died? It means that their body has stopped working. They can't breathe, they can't see, they can't feel, they can't hear us, they can't eat anymore. And most children, even a very young child, is going to know what it means when somebody's body or something's body stops working. And so one of the, Vanessa in my little biography and my little intro said that I worked at a funeral home in Iowa. And our main focus was children's grief support. And one of the things that we did was we had a grief group for children ages 3.5 to 5 years old whose loved ones have died. And it was called Little Hands. And at Little Hands, what we would do, one of the games that we would play is we'd have this board and we'd have two columns, can die and cannot die. And so we would pull out pictures of just different things, of a bunny, of a child, of a phone, of a tree, of a car, of these different things. And we'd hold them up and we say, can this die or can this not die? And so the biggest thing, if children are like, I don't know, can that? And we talk about, can it breathe? Does it feel? Does it taste? And so even a tree, we would talk about how that could die because it was living, right? And so we would talk about just that non-functionality. That was really the big thing that we focused on with kids when we asked, can it die or can't it die? So that non-functionality, what does it mean when someone has died? It means that their body has stopped working. The irreversibility, meaning when something has died, it cannot come back to life. So the timing, meaning it is forever. This can be very confusing for really up until about 6, sometimes even older. I've seen 10-year-olds that this is, again, that time concept is very hard, but also thinking about how video games, movies, those kind of things can kind of affect this. So if a child's playing a video game and their character dies or is killed, it still can come back sometimes, right? So that can be confusing for children, or in a movie where that character comes back, or a show. So making sure we explain to them in real life, when something has died, it will not come back to life. So it's permanent, that body has stopped working forever. But again, the timing for us, forever seems, at least for me personally, forever seems very big and scary. But think about for a child who doesn't have that sense of time, that's when they may keep asking those questions of, when is this person coming back? When are they coming back? Because they don't have that total grasp of time being forever. And then finally, the last component is just how universal it is. All things that are living will eventually die. And I think this is a concept that they do not understand until they're quite a bit older. So a lot of times this could be anywhere from 10 to 15 years old, that all living things will eventually die. It's also, again, each child's going to be different. If they have a classmate or someone young or someone their age who has died, they may understand that a little bit differently. But if everybody they know has been older when they've died, that might be really hard to understand as well. Any questions about those three concepts? I see there's a question in the chat. I just want to make sure I get those. Perfect. Yes, so acting out. So that is a great, great question, which is what we'll get to next. So as we move along, ways children express their grief. So again, it is not just emotional, right? There are a lot of ways that anybody of any age may express their grief. But when we talk about children, there are some common things to kind of look for. The other thing that I tell parents or those of us working with kids is these are some of the normal things. So if your child or your the little child that you're working with is experiencing these, again, you want to always follow up and make sure it's nothing else, but also understand that these are very common ways that children may express their feelings. And so when we talk about that, the children don't have the words. Even teenagers might not have the words to express what they're feeling, just like it's sometimes hard for us as adults to find the words. And so kids will generally act out what they are experiencing. And they're not, yes, some kids will sit in a group, and I do have done, and there are grief groups out there for children, but a lot of times they're very interactive. It's not, hey, let's sit and talk for an hour and a half. A lot of kids aren't going to be able to do that. First of all, their attention span might not last that long. But biggest thing is they're not going to have those words to be able to verbalize and use their voice boxes to express what they are going through and what they are experiencing. And so when we look at some of these common reactions, again, not every child is going to experience these. They may experience them at different times. So that regrief, they might not experience it right away. It may be later on in their grief process and their grief journey that they start experiencing these. So anger and aggression, somebody said anger right off the bat. And I think that is so important that we acknowledge that anger is very common in grief. Anger is very common after the loss of a loved one and just any change. Children are way better about expressing this than us adults are. Us adults usually hold it in, where a child may act out. And a lot of times that may come out as what I would have called, or what my parents would have called, a temper tantrum, right? They act out, it's very big, it's this big anger, explosive emotion. And so a lot of times families and us adults are like, stop, stop, stop. We don't want you to do that. However, if we don't follow up with, hey, what's going on, check in with them, they may think that feeling that way is wrong. I believe there are no wrong or right feelings in our grief. It's just what we do with those feelings that's either more helpful or not so helpful. So when we think about anger with a child, if that child is acting out and throwing a tantrum, I hope that, especially in this time, that we can check with them and say, hey, what's going on, buddy? I could tell you're really angry, or you know what, let's talk a little bit. What's going on that you're acting this way that you normally don't act this way? So you're addressing it, you're letting them know it's okay, but then giving them other tools to be able to process that in a more healthy way. Regression is super common. We see this even with teenagers, in that it's that comfort, right? And so especially with younger children, we talk about regression and we talk about those bedtime and sleeping. That's very common in all ages. Again, baby all the way through adults. But thinking about a child, that separation anxiety, so going to bed might be really scary. And I think of a little boy who came to one of our groups, and his mom had died in a car accident. She was away on business, and she died while she was away on business in this car accident. So for this little guy, he was probably 4 years old, 4 or 5. For this little guy, I have never seen that much separation anxiety. He was so afraid to be away from his dad or his older brother. But I think, again, in that little guy's mind, his mom left on a trip, which she had done. It was common for her to travel for work, but she left and she never came back. And so how do I really know, Dad, when you say you're leaving, you're really going to come back? So thinking about that, and again, not being annoyed by it, understanding where that child is coming from to better understand how we can best help them. So just that reassurance, it's that safety. They need to know that they are taken care of. And so a couple other things, the repetition of the questions, that's so common. We explain it to that child, but then they come back with us and they ask the question that we just answered yesterday. Or I hear a lot of people say, well, I talked to them about their loved one. So I talked to them about their aunt who just died, and they were really close to them. And then we sat and we talked about it, and they cried a little bit, but then they went off and they played. But then later that night, she came back and she asked me, like, when's Aunt Karen coming back? And I explained to her again, like I told you, Aunt Karen died. It's because, one, they're still processing it. So kids will process by playing. So when we go and we talk to them and they go and play, it doesn't mean that they don't care or they're not thinking about it. That's how kids are going to process it. So they're going to talk about it. They're going to go play. They may come back and talk about it some more and then go play. That is okay. That is their break from what they are doing, but also how they are processing it. Part of that is they may ask questions over and over again because they just want to make sure they understand it. I think there's also that I wish it would change, right? Just think about, like, when a child wants something, I'm going to keep asking mom for that toy. I'm going to ask her and I'm going to ask her. Maybe eventually she's going to give in just to make me quiet, right? So this time I'm going to keep asking. Really? Is she really not coming back? Is she really not coming back? Maybe it'll change this time. But also, just how they absorb things is going to be very different than how us adults absorb it. Announcing the death. I had a mom who said, my little girl, she's like 3 years old. I told her that her grandpa died. She's telling everybody on the street that grandpa died, the person in the checkout lane, the person at the coffee shop. But that's okay. It might be embarrassing for us as adults, right? But to that child, it's letting them just express it. They want to share that with somebody. I encourage families to let that happen, because what we do when we shut that down is we're saying we can't talk about this. Or say, you know what? When we're in the store, maybe we don't talk about that. But when we're at home or when we're with, so and so, yes, we can. But honestly, I think we allow it to happen. It's normalizing it. It's helping them be comfortable talking about it. So if we can, let them just share that. And then the final one, protecting parents and other adults. This is I don't know if I should say this because I don't want to upset them. And so what I encourage adults is, let them know that we can talk about this. I might cry or I might seem upset when we talk about it, but I still want to talk about it. It's not that you are making me sad. I'm just sad because grandma died, but let's talk about it still. But I see a lot of kids who will not say anything in front of the adults in their life because they want to protect them. So this is not an encompassing list. This is just kind of some of the things that a child might experience and some of the things that we might see in a child. One of my favorite activities to do in my grief groups, and especially in my kids groups, and I would do this from elementary school all the way to high school. One of the first activities was I'd have them pull out a piece of paper and write on the top of it, what is grief? And I would have them, we would either just shout them out, have them write them down, but say, what are some of the feelings or things that someone might experience after their loved one has died? And I really should have put one of I would have them write out all of the words, all of the things. So angry, guilty, happy, relief, sadness, depression, can't sleep, can't eat, don't want to be around other people. I would always have a full page of paper of what they said. And to me, that is so powerful. I would take all of that, these neat lists, and then I'd put it into word art. So they're called wordles. And then I would present that to the group, the next group. And it was so powerful to see what they would come up with. But it was so comforting for some kids, because you'd hear someone say something and the other children would be like, yeah, that's what I felt. Or I felt that way too. And that's okay. So we normalized what they were experiencing and allowed them to feel it and let them know it's okay. So again, thinking for yourself too. I mean, if you took out a piece of paper right now, write down all of those feelings, all of those experiences that you might have when you are grieving. Children can do the same thing. Any questions about the ways or things that children might feel, the things they might say or do, expressing their feelings?
I don't have any questions, but I think that's so helpful, Carrie, how you mentioned they process through play. I mean, that makes such sense, but we're just not used to thinking of it that way, but it makes perfect sense because that's how they understand the world at that age.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And again, there's no magical thing that you need to, I mean, yes, there's definitely hints, but I want you to really honestly think about where are children at developmentally? How do they live their life? How does that affect or how does that play into their grieving process?
This is Lori. One thing working in child welfare, we found that the art, sand play, and drawing is a really healthy way for kids to get out how they're feeling. I know that this is different than kids being removed from their biological home, but it really kind of isn't.
Yeah.
You know, without going into that, but so my brain keeps going to things like, you know, having the kids draw. Often they can express in a drawing what they can't express in words.
Yeah.
Or you'll see them express in behavior what they can't express in words.
Exactly. So true.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lori. That's so true. And yes, a child being removed from the home is a huge grief.
Absolutely.
Yes, again, I think us listing like things that can cause grief, that's another thing that I would have them do. So there's a lot of similarities, but that use
Sure.
of art and play is so helpful. So I am not an art therapist. I am not a play therapist. However, I have seen how, drawing out how we feel or putting a color to how we feel can be very helpful. And so a lot of the groups that I've done with kids or individual, if I'm working with a child one-on-one, it's going to involve some kind of art project, whether that's just even pulling out markers and colored pencils and a piece of paper, or something more in depth, or a memory box that a child can create and paint, or a holiday bulb or ornament that they can decorate in honor of their loved one. Or just even, we had this map that I would use with kids that had like different things that we might feel. And it was kind of like a journey, because I believe our grief is a journey. So playing with a car of where we're at today and where that child was at in their grief or what they were feeling. Definitely including art and play of ways to cope or help them process their grief. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a little bit in our list of how we can really help them. I'll be honest, I'm not going to read through all of these, but I was also going to say I can always get you all the PowerPoint too, Vanessa, if that's something you all would like. But why children might be confused. The biggest one, honestly, is that we have maybe not told them at all. We have told them in a way that they can't understand, meaning we've used terms that they don't understand, or we've said something but not followed up and clarified or asked them those questions. So those are kind of the big things that really can cause a child to become confused, and also then very frightened. Again, the bottom line is we want to have an open, honest conversation with children. I will say we are kind of a death denying society. And so that can be very difficult to just do us adults to adults. So I really encourage adults that have a child in their life to try to put that aside and know that by us talking about death and by us talking about grief is not going to damage that child. And in fact, what I have seen personally and what I have seen professionally, it's the opposite. When we don't talk to them, that's when they're going to run into problems. That's when they're going to run into issues. That's when they're going to be very confused and scared. And so thinking about that, again, I'm not going to read through all these. They're important, yes. But I think the important thing is to think about my thing, there we go, that we want to be open, we want to include them in those conversations, we want to ask the questions that ask what questions they have so that we're giving them the information that they need. So if we again, I those are important, but I really want to get to these because they also kind of fit into why might a child become confused. So when we talk about how do we help a child, here's a great little top 10 list because we all like lists and stages. Even though, again, everybody's going to be different. Every child, every experience is going to be different. However, these are some things to kind of keep in mind when we talk about how can I best help a child who or a teen who is grieving. So that number 10, ask who the expert is. You are not the expert. I am not the expert. That child, that teen, that griever is the expert. Meaning, yes, I know what's normal. I know helpful tips. I know helpful advice. I can give all of those things, but I am not an expert in their grief. So that leads into the second one. Throw expectations out the window. So throw your expectations of what that child or that teen might be feeling or what they should be feeling. Please just clear all of that out. Yes, you want to have, a plan if you are going to go talk to a child. You want to have a plan in place of what you're going to say or, what you might say to them. However, don't think you know where that child is at. Let them truly guide you. And so when we talk about using honest language, when we talk about having that open, honest conversation, the other thing that we want to do is make sure that we don't give them too much and we don't assume that they know what we're talking about. So when we're talking to a child, always follow up with those questions of, what does that mean? Or does that make sense to you? Or when we say that someone has died, I always ask them, what does that mean? What do you think that means? Don't just assume because they're 6 years old, they know exactly what it means when someone has died. Ask them. So I have had a lot of conversations with parents of just like, how do I even tell my child that this person has died? So we'll walk through that. How did they die? What a lot of, again, children know a lot more than what we give them credit for. So even a heart attack, they may not understand what like causes a heart attack, why that happens, but they do know that a heart attack can cause the heart to stop working. And so, for example, let's say their grandpa died from a heart attack. Encouraging that family to have that honest conversation and sit down with their child and say that grandpa has died and he died from a heart attack. Leave it at that and say, what do you, of course, you might have more conversation, a little more in that, but then check in with them. What does that mean? Do you know what that means? Or do you want to talk about that a little bit more? Grandpa's heart was not working properly and it stopped working. And that made his whole body stop working. And so grandpa can't see anymore. He can't taste, he can't breathe. And so again, explaining it in that way, letting them, again, checking in, letting them have time to ask questions, letting them, if it's enough, let them go play and just say, you know what, I'm here when you want to talk about it. We don't have to talk about it right now, but I am here when you are ready and when you need to talk about it. And then truly be there for them. Answer the questions to the best of your ability. I don't know is an answer. I don't know, but let me ask so-and-so about that. Or I don't know yet, but when I find that out, I will let you know. So don't lie or fill in just because you don't know and you're like, well, this is going to be better than saying nothing at all. No, make sure that you are giving them the truthful answers. And again, letting them have that time, letting them have time to come and ask you when they are ready to ask those questions again. One of the biggest, the best story, I should say, of why it's always important to give them honest language is that also builds trust with that child. And so if we tell them something that isn't true, or we leave out a big chunk of information, One, they're going to find out eventually. Sometimes it's from somebody who may not be a trusted adult, or they overhear it and that's how they learn of something, or they find out years later. And so give them those tools now, because if they don't have all of those pieces, they're going to fill in with their own thoughts and what's going on in their own little heads. And so that oftentimes is way more scary than the truth. And so using that honest language, having that conversation, giving them those pieces of the puzzle so that they can put it all together and start their grieving process. Number 7, helping connect the dots. What I mean by that is, how do we help them know how to process and cope with their feelings? So connecting the dots is, what are they already doing that is helpful? What is something that they enjoy to do that maybe could help them and be a processing tool? And so ask them, well, what do you normally do when you're having a tough day? What's something that you do? If you're someone who's really close to them, like a parent or a person who's in their life all the time, you may already know that. So you could say, I know that you really like to go ride your bike when you're having a tough time. Why don't we put that down as something you could do? Or when they're having one of those anger bursts, something physical with children is very, very helpful. So I know you really like to go play basketball. Do you want to go shoot hoops right now? Me saying shoot hoops is like hilarious, because the 5-year-old is going to beat me. So, but again, asking them, what is it that they like to do? What is helpful? What has been helpful to them? And how can we use that to process our grief? Another activity that I do with kids is have them list what helps on tough days. Have them write down a list, look at pictures, play with my friends. Well, which friends are you going to play with? Ask them. Don't just have talk to my friends. Well, who would you go talk to? Talk to somebody at school. Well, who is it that you're going to talk with? Help them really truly develop a plan using what we maybe already know is helpful, but how could we use, I really love to draw. Well, how could that be? How could you use that when you're having that tough day? Could you draw your loved one a picture? What are you going to do with that picture after that? Or do you want to draw your loved one? Again, thinking about what they already like to do, things that maybe are already in place as those coping strategies, help them connect the dots to those things. Including children in the memorialization, oh, so important. So when we have a funeral service or a celebration of life, how do we include the children in on that? Can they be the ones to put together the photo board? Do they want to draw a picture? Do they want to make a memory box of their loved ones? It could be right away there at the beginning, so helping with the funeral or memorial service, or later on down the road. Think about the holidays or those special times in that child's life. How would they want to include their loved one, or how can they honor and remember their loved one during that time? Connect with community resources. There are a lot of really great resources out there. Here in the Denver area, Judy's House is one of the best resources for children and teen grief. There's a lot of great national resources out there. And I'll put these actually in the chat boxes, where kind of just because I can't type and talk at the same time. But the big one that two of the big resources for children specific grief support would be the National Alliance for Children's Grief, NACG. They just changed their name, so I always have to think it's National Alliance for Children's Grief. And then that's a national organization, amazing resources, tools that you can purchase, free resources, articles, all of that. There's also the Dougie Center. They're a grief center out in Portland, Oregon. And they have amazing resources for different types of losses and different types of deaths. So in different languages for different ages, they're another really awesome resource. The other one that I always recommend is What's Your Grief? And it's just what'syourgrief.com. Amazing resource for adults and for children and teens as well. They have amazing articles, blog posts, podcasts. Again, I'll type those in as we're, and I think somebody might be. So I can definitely get those to you, but find out what's local, but also find out what isn't local, because just because it might be a national organization, they still have really great tools. And if you're in an area that doesn't have child specific grief support, that would be a way to find and the thing with the pandemic is a lot more programs are offering virtual events, so it doesn't matter where you are. So I know Dougie Center and National Alliance for Children's Grief, they have national resources that can be used regardless of where you are at.
Carrie, just to interrupt a second, I did type those in for you.
Perfect.
And just want to give you a time warning. We're at about 11 minutes left. So I'm going to leave a little time for Q&A.
Thank you. I will fly through
thank you.
these, and yes, I want to open it up to questions and anything that you all might have. Secondary losses, those are what has changed because of this death, or what has changed because of this major loss and change in our lives. So there's a lot of secondary losses. Again, think about future secondary losses. And so, especially with a child, when we talk about those big milestones in their life, remember that that can cause that re-grief, but also you may see an increase in the grief. The one that I think of is daddy-daughter dances or mother-son dances, especially those younger kids. Again, if their parent has died, or Grandparents' Day, who's going to come to their school on Grandparents' Day? Thinking about those secondary losses and thinking about how those are specific examples of how you can offer support and resources. Validating all of the feelings. Again, there are no right or wrong feelings. It's just what we do with them that are helpful or not so helpful. Model and teach how to honor life. How do we lead by example? Giving them ideas of that memorialization does not have to be just at the beginning of their grief and right after that person has died. How does that ongoing? I think there are gifts that we get from people in our lives, and they might be physical gifts as like a ring or a necklace or something they gave us, but a gift can also be how I choose to live my life. So my Aunt Karen always taught me that family was very important. That's how I'm going to live my life. Or I'm going to play this game in honor of my dad who died. Nobody else needs to know about it, but I am honoring him in my own way. So again, how do we teach them? How do we give them different ideas? And the number one thing we can do for any grieving child or teen or adult is listen. You will not have the answers. You will not be able to take that pain away, but you can still listen to them and offer support. I always say we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Let's listen. Let them guide you in what they are needing, what they're wanting, how we can best support them. But if we listen, be amazed what we can find out sometimes from kids and adults, of course, but kids too. All right, that is it. I feel like we rushed through things, but there's so much awesome information that I definitely want to answer any questions that you all might have or anything else that I can do for you all.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Carrie. So much information there and so many really helpful tools to keep in mind. I have a question for myself. I don't know if there are more. If there are, you can put them in the chat. What is your feeling, Carrie, about involving, you said involve children with memorials and that kind of thing. My thought is that children should be like allowed to go to funerals and celebrations of life and that kind of thing. But I know that there are a lot of people who think that's not appropriate. I mean, do you have a feeling about that kind of thing?
So my suggestion is always let the child have the ultimate decision. What the best thing that we can do is explain what the funeral or the memorial is going to look like. Explain that to them. Give them, where are we meeting? How long is it going to be? What's going to be happening there? If they decide they don't want to go, that's okay. Let them know what they will do in the meantime. But honestly, I think that if we give them the tools of what they're going to, what they can expect, what they're going to see, I do not see a reason why a child should not attend a funeral service. But the most important thing is to really leave it up to them. I was talking to a gal earlier. She's a college student, so mid-20s. And she was like, I don't like funerals because I remember when I was a child, I was forced to go to a funeral and go up and see my loved one in the casket, but nobody told me what was going on. And so that was very scary for her. But I hear a lot of kids who say, I wanted to be there. It's also that if it is, they are able to see that person's body, the deceased body, it's that realization that they have died. So kids are so factual, they are so concrete. And so when they can see someone's deceased body, and again, we want to prepare them for that. But when they can see that, it's that permanency. Okay, I saw that with my own eyes. It helps me realize that this is real and that person truly has died. So I think with guidance, children of any age, if they want to attend a funeral service or memorial, that it can be very helpful. But it is that process of not just like, hey, we're going to this funeral. You're going to see people crying, and then that's all they know. Well, that can be very scary. So giving them those tools.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a comment,
Yeah.
not a question per se, but in my personal life, so not as a professional doula, but personally, my granddaughter, who is just turned 5, has lost both of her grandfathers in the last probably 9 months or so. And so we've been dealing, with her grief, which seems to, based on, what your information conveyed, seems to have been pretty easy, and she seems to have handled it fairly well. But I appreciate all the information that you gave us about nuances and ways that it plays out, that I probably have not been as aware of. And I think it's going to be a real learning tool for me to work through the information and see how it's applied and utilized, in really useful ways.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing that, Valerie, because I think I will tell you, when I first started in the field, I only had worked with adults. And I'm like, sure, I'll take this job where I work with kids. It is one of the most eye-opening experiences I have ever had, honestly, in this field. Kids teach us so much if we're open to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I will be honest, I've always learned things from the people I've worked with in this field, grieving individuals at the end of life. I learned from them. I will tell you what, I've probably learned the most from kids I've worked with. And I mean that, and it gives me such a different perspective. It puts things in such a different perspective, view, but also how I process things. Man, there's nothing, I know that sounds crazy, but I love doing groups with kids because they're very honest. They usually don't have the filters that us adults may have. And that, should I ask this question? Should I even say this? Kids will ask it. If you create that safe place for them to truly feel safe, that they can ask anything and everything, they will ask them. And I think that's so healthy. And the conversations that come up are so amazing. And so I do think we can learn from them. And we need to pay attention to how they grieve sometimes better than us adults, honestly. So I always think that if we allow ourselves to be open to that, if we take out and we put away our own assumptions, our own uncomfortableness with things, we truly, truly can help kids. And we're giving them that foundation, because whether it's someone really close has died, or they're just going through a difficult time, maybe their loved one is deployed, maybe their loved one is incarcerated. How do we process that? If we give them these tools and this basis, it really can be helpful.
Yep.
Yes.
This is Lori. I was just thinking about the top 10 list. You mentioned that helping kids connect the dots, like shooting hoops. Other things that really are good at helping traumatized and grieving brains would be things like taking a walk, going swimming, hula hoops. Rhythmic movement is critical, rocking back and forth.
Yeah.
Oh goodness, dancing is another one that's fun. Swaying to music, like you might at church or somewhere. All those sorts of things help to rewire a traumatized or grieving brain.
Well, and music is huge, especially for teenagers.
Absolutely.
Music, I mean, music, I love music. And I always say, somebody put it into words, what I was feeling, and put it to this music. So know that music, especially for teenagers and preteens, is very, very powerful. But yes, using those, that movement too, is very, very helpful. Scream into your pillow. That's okay. You know, pet your pet. Go for a walk. Finding those things that are comforting to them, not what I think, but what's comforting and helpful to them. So yes, thank you, Lori. Thank you for that.
You bet.
We have about a minute left. So is there any other, let's call it a burning question someone would like to ask? Because I know that Carrie would welcome any of you getting in touch with her directly if you wanted to ask her anything else after our program today, but we like to keep this on time. So if there's anything else anybody has. Oh, we're all good.
No, this has been very, very helpful. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Thank you. Thank you. And yes, if you have questions, please reach out. I'm available, and thank you all for being here and for all that you all do. So thank you. Thank you.
This was
And-
really good. Thank you.
And we're being asked to share the PowerPoint. So we'll get a copy of that from you and share that to our attendees today.
For sure. I'd be happy to.
Thank you so
Quick-
much, Carrie.
Quick
And
question, would you be okay if we pass on the PowerPoint and share that as well?
The only thing I ask is that you keep my contact information on it.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
and just just make sure that
Yeah, no,
I'm referenced somewhere. But yes, please.
Yeah,
pass
no,
that along.
I would leave it as is. I just have a colleague who just lost his sister-in-law with small children, so that might be helpful for him.
Yeah, and if anybody needs any more resources or something in particular, I didn't even get to how do we talk to a child about someone who's died from suicide or overdose death. That's probably the big question. So if those things ever come up, again, please think of me as a resource. I'm happy to help however I can. But yes, please feel free to share it, whoever might find it helpful.
be
Thanks.
careful, Carrie, because we're going to invite you back at some
I would
point in the
be-
future
I would be happy to come
to
back.
talk about more things relating to
That
children.
would be awesome. Thank
Yes.
you.
Wonderful.
Yes, thank you all.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us, and I appreciate all of you being here. So we will have this available in the future. And as Carrie said, she's a resource for us out there. So thank you so much, everybody. And we'll wrap this up and say goodbye until next time.
Great.
Thank you all for
Vanessa.
coming.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.